Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Horsetooth Cinema. Today I've got another new release review for you, and that is going to be for Luca Guadagnino's Bones and All. This horror film follows Marin after she was abandoned by her father. The reason that he abandoned her was that she discovered relatively late in life that she is what's called an eater, which is a person that is basically compelled to eat people. And she soon discovers that she's not the only one like this. Her odyssey across the United States has her encounter Lee, played by Timothée Chalamet, who she falls for on her journey to discover her family secrets. So I saw this movie at the Lyric, which is, it's my usual theater of choice, I would say, here in town. And it does have more of like an art house flavor to it than you might normally get at like a regular multiplex. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely love supporting them. If I can see any movie somewhere in town, I'm gonna choose to see it at the Lyric. But after leaving the theater for this one, I kind of did wish just slightly that I had seen this at like the local multiplex mall theater. Wouldn't there be something so wonderful about watching this kind of filth in the same theater that was showing like Spirited or Wakanda Forever in the theater like an hour before? My mind's a little twisted about this kind of stuff. What can I say? Recently on my channel, I also reviewed another movie called The Menu, which I did really like. And The Menu kind of marketed itself as like this sort of horror movie centered around food, this kind of restaurant slasher almost. And I was kind of hoping that the shocking surprises that were going to be taken in the Menu went a bit more in like the cannibal direction. I think we all need a good cannibal movie once a year. And I was a little disappointed that it wasn't a cannibal movie. Especially since early in the year we had Fresh on Hulu, which I didn't really enjoy, as you might have seen in my review, but I wasn't really sure what to expect going into Bones and All from the trailer. I was expecting some sort of a vampire movie, and no, this is just kind of a full-on cannibal romance movie. This is directed by Luca Guadagnino, and I had only seen actually one of his other films before, which was his Suspiria remake back in 2018. I actually still haven't seen Call Me By Your Name. I know that's a kind of a favorite for a lot of people these days. I just haven't gotten around to it yet, and I haven't really checked out much of his earlier stuff either. But as far as his Suspiria remake goes, I mean, I'm a little bit biased because I do absolutely love the original. And while his remake I don't think was anywhere near as good as the original, I did like that it basically, it took a lot of liberties with the story and went in a much different direction. So even though it wasn't fully coming together for me like the original did, I still really did admire kind of his attempt. I was surprised with that movie kind of how violent it was and how kind of, how it wasn't really afraid to be disgusting when it needed to be. Which is something that I think some horror directors, especially art house ones, kind of shy away from these days. So given that I was kind of pleasantly surprised by a lot of those aspects of Suspiria, I was actually kind of looking forward to this new movie, which has kind of been marketed, I would say, as like a vampire movie. I kind of was joking with a friend that I definitely saw people go into the theater who were like high school aged girls, and I just was thinking that maybe they were expecting like a kind of Twilight movie, and that's definitely not what this is, so don't go in thinking that. As I mentioned, this is less a vampire movie and more just kind of a full-on cannibal movie. And I actually think cannibal movies oftentimes can do really interesting things with those ideas. And I think this movie is no exception. I think Bones and All is really interested in the morality of not only cannibalism specifically in this context, but more generally about eating meat in general and just consuming other creatures. There are very like thoughtful challenges to humanity's place in the world as beings who eat meat. And the main way that it does this is that there are a lot of characters in the film on various ends of sort of that moral spectrum. In a lot of ways, many of the eaters in the film, such as Timothée Chalamet's character, are just doing this because they need to survive. They have this sort of primal desire to consume, and if they don't, they'll die. And I like that that's not explicitly stated, it's just sort of implied throughout some of the events in the film. So that's one end of the spectrum, and then a little bit more towards the middle, you have people like Mark Rylance's character, who is an eater as well. But unlike Timothée Chalamet, who just seems to be doing it to survive, he seems to really love what he does, and he seems to really revel in his kills in particular. So you have him getting a lot closer to the evil end of the spectrum in a lot of ways. And for me, the person who's furthest on the evil end of the spectrum is actually somebody who we meet kind of halfway through the film and isn't an eater at all. He's basically a friend of an eater, and he's somebody who an eater has kind of taught his cannibalistic ways to. And even though this person doesn't feel the same sort of primal desires to consume people, he does it anyway because it's this lifestyle he's become fond of just with his friend. And for me, that kind of stood out as a kind of a whole different level of evil compared to somebody like Timothy Chalamet's character especially. And you could sort of tie that into humanity's place around eating meat in general, not people specifically, but just eating meat, as in we don't necessarily have a biological need to consume meat. Like we're not like other animals, as in we'll die without it. But a lot of us do it anyway, so how do we sort of justify that morally? And I think the film kind of digs into those ideas in a really interesting way. Bones and All is also really well acted. I really like the performances from the two leads, Timothy Chalamet and Taylor Russell, I think her name is. But the standout performance for me, and I think a lot of people might look at this guy's performance and think that it was bad, but I absolutely loved Mark Rylance in this movie. It's not a very naturalistic performance, I wouldn't say at all, and he's definitely hamming it up. But he's hamming it up in a way that sort of makes me think of a lot of kind of like campy 80s horror movies, and I kind of liked that the film embraced a little bit of like of the humor there with him. I genuinely think Mark Rylance should be nominated for Best Supporting Actor at the upcoming Oscars, especially given the fact that he actually won an Oscar for having a really boring role in Bridge of Spies, so I think this would make up for that really nicely. So yeah, I liked a lot of the ideas that the movie was going for, and I really liked a lot of the performances in it. But I do have issues with this movie for sure. I would say the biggest issue for me would have to be the structure and overall pacing of it. When you're watching it, you're thinking a lot about, okay, like what is the overall goal of these characters with the road trip, and where is this story gonna take us? And in that regard, I would say for most of the movie, it actually felt really aimless. There's a moment in the movie where sort of the main road trip conflict is basically solved, but then you still have about 30 to 40 minutes of movie left. And you're kind of like, okay, like the things that happen, you know, in the last 30 to 40 minutes of the movie, you know, have significance and they're not meaningless or anything by any means. But in just in terms of like how it feels pacing wise watching it, and as well as just thinking about the structure of it in general, I'm not sure it was really necessary, and it definitely feels a little bit messy. And I understand you could make the argument that you know, the aimless quality of this movie sort of works given that it's a road trip movie, and it sort of captures the aimlessness of these characters, especially within their romance, in the sense that they're not really sure where to go with one another. And I could see that, but I'm still not sure it completely works, because what I think is actually involving about the movie is the ideas that it has about you know, sort of the morality of consumption, and how, you know, the sort of cannibal genre stuff ties into that, as opposed to the romance. I actually didn't really find the romance that terribly involving. I just wanted to feel the chemistry between the leads a little bit more, have it feel a little bit more raw, especially since the movie is trying to explore very, you know, transgressive ideas. As it stands, it just kind of felt, I was thinking about the movie Badlands a lot, because you know, it is kind of a road trip across the country movie, and there are a lot of darker ideas, but you know, when you're doing like a kind of an extreme horror movie, like a cannibal movie, it makes sense to sort of get a lot further into those emotions, I think, and really get to that raw human emotion. And it just sort of felt okay with itself being like, we're doing Badlands, but like it's not creepy because the girl isn't underage or whatever. So I don't know, it just felt like there was potential for more here. But if the film wanted to dig into these ideas a little bit less and be less cerebral, go for a little bit more of a dreamy approach, why not go full like Claire Denis Trouble Every Day with it? I mean, if you've seen that movie, it has this very like avant-garde, almost like French New Wave feel to it, but its subject matter is absolutely filthy. So I kind of would have liked, if it wanted to go for that less idea-driven and more like dreamy approach where you can project your own ideas onto it, it probably should have committed to it a little bit more. But speaking of Trouble Every Day, I did see a lot of visual nods to Trouble Every Day in this movie, especially in sort of the final climactic scene. And similar to the Suspiria remake, I mean, I admire that this film wasn't afraid to get really filthy with its violence and really visceral. And where the violence in the Suspiria remake actually felt a little bit like stale and definitely CG dependent for me, this one felt much more practical, much more tangible. So overall, you know, I enjoyed the film. I had a good time with it. I think it has interesting ideas. I just don't think those ideas are nearly as explored as maybe they could be. And the film didn't really offer me that much else outside of some of those basic cannibal movie genre ideas. So I'm gonna give this a 3. It's a fairly strong 3. I could see myself revisiting it again, but I just didn't get as much out of this as maybe some people will get. And I will say, if you're looking for a movie that's gonna dig into these ideas of carnal desires of the flesh being rooted in sort of this cannibal vampire genre lens, I would suggest 2 movies you should check out before this one. One being Claire Denis' Trouble Every Day, which is, you know, it's a very loose film, so definitely prepare yourself for that. If you've seen like some French New Wave or slow cinema stuff, you'll probably be fine. And just understand that you might not completely get it after one viewing. But one much more accessible one I would suggest watching is Julia Ducournau's Raw, which is a fairly recent film. Same director as Titane, and it's sort of a coming-of-age cannibal movie that gets to a lot of these sort of sexual desire themes, kind of again through kind of the lens of cannibalism. So I would definitely suggest checking out those 2 first before you go check out Bones and All, especially if you want to get an idea of where I'm coming from with some of my criticisms here. But yeah, it's a solid movie. I would recommend checking it out if you get a chance. Anyway, that's the review. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, you can definitely like it down below, and subscribe to the channel if you want. I've got more videos coming up soon, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.